So after months of postponing and then weeks of actually repainting the entire exterior from a white with a blue stripe to a nice dark metallic green, I let that paint sit and cure for about a week before I could start the rest of the assembly process, and that is pretty much the final assembly as well. So some of these parts were assembled at a very early stage in the build when I wasn't really clear that I wanted to be repainting it, or if I was ready to take on that task. So they were then quickly disassembled again for the paint to be stripped. All of the parts and screws that I took out were taped to the parts so I didn't lose them and knew exactly which ones needed to go where, so I could quickly reassemble it once everything was repainted. So I'm just going to start at the very beginning of the instruction manual with pack 1 for all of the exterior bits that I disassembled at the early stages, and going along that way following the instructions and skipping all of the steps that I of course already did and finalized. So as you can see with the repainted parts, most of them have been of course repainted on the exterior. Well, I say most, but I mean all of them, and some of them have been painted on the inside as well. Now, not the entire inside needed to be repainted, so I simply focused on the areas that would be visible after some of the parts would be opened or closed, and simply just needed to be finished off on those areas. So for the doors, I simply needed to do the edges and some of the hinges, and then could assemble them too. So with the first stages of the build now complete and reassembled again, I can pick up where I left off. With the chassis and interior completely finished, and then the first steps now taken, I can focus on to the next steps, and that is to finish off the actual exterior and the entire build, so to speak. So with that, we can move on to finishing off the front clip and then assembling that to the rest of the main body. Now, of course, I want to be really careful with the freshly painted parts, and therefore I added the styrofoam softer underground underneath it so I wouldn't damage the paint if I would just do it on my cutting mats, as those could be very sharp and leave nasty scratches in the paintwork, and that of course is not what we want. Some of the exterior vents were also screwed in quickly, and then we are going to jump onto some smaller pieces to finish off the front bumper, so-called sub-assemblies, and just keep going that way. Now, some of the inside parts are not as nice as others. Specifically, the hood isn't really that nice. It has a lot of overspray underneath it, and I probably should have refinished it, but during the heat of the moment, I really wanted to finish this build off, as I was pretty excited to get it done. Also, after waiting for about a year to finalize it, my attention span on this build was kind of running out, and I simply just wanted to finish it off, and the inside of the hood wasn't really that big of a priority for me. Now, some of you are probably going to be screaming at your screens that if you're going to do a job, do it right, and I agree to a certain extent, and the inside of the hood doesn't really have that much priority for me, as it's going to be closed for probably the rest of the model's life, apart from a couple pictures here and there. One of the other things that might be really cool to some and not interesting at all to others is that there is an entire speaker and also lighting system that needs to be installed into the model, and therefore after assembly should function with functional lights front and rear on the interior and exterior. Now, for me, I'm not really that big of a fan of lights on models, as I simply don't use them and they are a lot of work to install. Now, nonetheless, these are specifically designed and made to fit to this model and are included in the kit, so of course I did install them, and it was quite a chore putting all the wires in place and not messing them up. And in the end, in all fairness, I did mess up one or two, and after fully assembling it, I'm not entirely sure if all the wires are wired correctly, and that is fully up to me, and therefore not all of the lights might be working. So I just wanted to put that out there, that you shouldn't have your expectations set all too high for all of the lights to be working at the end of this video, as they are not. And again, that's my fault, but nonetheless the model looks pretty good. I guess that's something. So with a model on this scale, there is of course a lot of room for extra little details to be added. And one of these fun details that they did add is the gas filler cap actually being functional, sort of, with a small hinge in there too. After installing a couple of chrome pieces, I could start mounting the doors. I first just put the doors on, then turned the model over and screwed them in place permanently at the hinge. The headliner itself also needed a little bit of assembly. The sun visors and the rearview mirror needs to be put on, and it could then be snapped in place. On the inside of the body there is still a little bit of primer visible here and there. Most of it will be hidden by either the headliner or the rest of the interior pieces, but some of these parts will not be hidden, so I just quickly painted them black with some bellow paints and a small brush. So like I briefly mentioned earlier in the video, there are a lot of wires to make the actual lights and some sounds functional on this model. They of course need to be connected with the exterior and the chassis for them all to be functional, and then during this step I somehow snatched a wire in between the chassis and the interior. Even though I was very careful, I didn't notice until I fully assembled it and then found a wire hanging loose underneath. And to be fully honest, I did not want to disassemble the entire model again, potentially breaking some things here and there just for a wire to be reconnected and then the lights to be working. So I will try to actually make these lights functional if I can find a battery, but not all of them will probably be functional. But we will find out a bit later on which do and which don't work. So there are a couple of special wheels available for this model. They are a bit wider and I think a bit bigger, and these are the ones that are currently installed on the model. And they also come with a standard wheel for the car with a nice white wall on the tire. And I couldn't really decide which ones I wanted to use. I really like the design of the standard wheels that come with the kit, but I somehow like the size of the tires being a bit meatier from the aftermarket set a lot better. These are both from Agora models and are supposed or meant for this model. So what I decided to do is install the standard set on one side and then the upgraded set on the other, so you can choose whichever one you want to look at. In the last episode, I was in a bit of a predicament. To stripe or not to stripe? I didn't really want to paint the stripes on, as I was really happy with the finish of the actual paint work and I was proud of that, and I didn't want to potentially ruin that by adding the stripes on top of it. Plus the fact that a stripeless Mustang has a pretty mean look to it, specifically in this dark green, giving it a bit of a bullet vibe. So I thought of another method. I quickly reached out to some of you guys on Instagram and was overwhelmed with the amount of guys wanting to help me out with this. I needed someone who was able to design and specifically design them to the standards that PrintLab wants them to be. A small decal sheet, or actually multiple decal sheets, with a couple options for the stripes on the side and also on the top of the model. So I had all options available and could decide which one I wanted to use. So the first one to actually reach out was Hilmi. He was super friendly, super helpful, and extremely knowledgeable, as he is a graphic designer and does this for a living. So that helps out a lot. We discussed a couple of measurements here and there, sent over a couple of designs of the stripes that I wanted, and he quickly went to work and drew up a first initial sketch and try out for me to just cut out and put on the model and see if the sizes were correct. Some of them needed to be a little bit shorter, others a little bit longer, and once that final design was made, he drew up all of the plans and we can send them over to Spot Model. So if you know anything about hobby shops online, Spot Model is one of the bigger ones out there. They have a huge variety of products, various different scales, and pretty much everything for every modeler. They also started to do PrintLab, and that is a decal printing service. You do require a little bit of skill in some of these designing softwares. I personally have zero skill in that whatsoever, so thankfully Hilmi was able to help me out with that and pretty much take on all of the work by himself. I simply just had to do some of the measuring and designing cues that I wanted, and that's pretty much it. So we sent those out to Spot Model. They were accepted by them after looking over them and then printed out. Now there are multiple different sheets with a couple of different stripes on there. Like I said, I wasn't sure which ones I wanted to use or if I wanted to use any of them at all, so I went with the standard double stripe on the entire length of the model, and also the triple stripe with two thinner stripes on the side and the wider one in the middle, and of course also the stripe 4 on the side. So these decals are pretty much factory spec. They have multiple different layers. The white layer is of course the main decal, and then there is a clear coat on top, so they are protected and also have a nice glossy finish. All of this clear coat also keeps the decals together, so there are no separate letters, and it doesn't need to be cut out carefully along the edges, as that clear coat layer has been specifically designed just to extrude around the edges a little bit and keep them all together and give it a super nice finish. So once that was all said and done, the decals arrived, I could simply just start applying them. Also, be very careful and read the instructions first, as these decals work a little bit different than usual, as you're not supposed to use any heat or decal setting solutions. Simply just add a bit of water to the surface, dunk the decals in water for a couple of seconds, and you're pretty much ready to start applying them. If you are interested in ordering some decals for yourself, I will be leaving the links down below to Spot Model's PrintLab, and you can check out all of the requirements on their website, and of course also the entire assortment of other products they offer. So initially I wanted to do a stripe on the top and also on the side. Then I didn't want to do any of the decals at all, and then I simply just decided that the decal on the side for the stripe is a nice clean look to tie it all together and not have it as one big green machine, but just make it stand out a little bit more. And in the end I decided not to do the stripe on top, as that is pretty much the Mustang thing to do. I have multiple Mustangs in my collection already, and pretty much all of them have stripes on the top. So for this one, I decided just to keep it cleaner than the other ones and not install the entire stripe front to back, but just a little detail on the side with the GT500 lettering and the thinner stripes. Now, of course, I do still have all of the decals with the various stripe options laying around, so if I ever do decide to change my mind, I can install them later on, as they are super high quality and will last a long time. So somehow these standard wheels stuck out to me as looking a little bit weird and needed a bit of help. And what I decided to do was just add a bit of a Panelline wash to some of the deeper areas just to give them a bit of a shaded look, and that pretty much fixed it entirely for me. I was really happy with the way that it came out. Building this model was quite a journey. It took about a year from start to finish. A lot of stuff happened in between, a little bit of postponing, some life-changing events here and there, but overall, after doing a lot of work, I am incredibly satisfied with the way that this model came out. I love that I decided to repaint it, even though it was a humongous task. This green fits so well on the model, and in my opinion looks fantastic combined with the saddle tan brown interior. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this series as much as I enjoyed building this model. There will be a lot more models similar to this one appearing on the channel from Agora pretty soon. Next up will probably be the Shelby Cobra. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing with that for now. Maybe I'm just going to keep it stock, as it does look really good in the blue and white combo. But if you have any other ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. There will also be a full build video on this one in a bit of a shorter format in a couple of weeks' times. So if you want to recap this entire build, feel free to wait for that one. It will be appearing on the channel as soon as I finish it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.